absence. A voice. Silence. Forever. You are born of our power. Does not our very life force flow within your veins? We feel such loss. Yet within you sense something else. Emptiness and satisfaction. There can be only one explanation. You have succumbed to the cravings of your humanity. You squander our gift to you. What was hidden can be taken away. This is what awaits us all, should you fail. Return their commander to us while time yet remains. Leave us.
Deadly humans. As it happened, it was the Kalu-Kamsku who encountered humans first, and being the Kalu-Kamsku, they immediately attacked. This was unwise. Our galaxy is a big place, and has only a handful of sentient species capable of interstellar flight. Yes, foremost of whom are we, the Amia. As it turned out, unknown to anyone else, the humans had quietly been building a small domain for themselves in one remote and largely unremarkable corner of the galaxy. Nothing major, just a few dozen colonies in the systems closest to their home star. But the important thing is, they had no idea that the Kalu-Kamsku existed, or any other sentient species for that matter. One would think, therefore, that in a first encounter between a species as aggressive, well, aggressive is the wrong word, say uncompromising, as the Kalu-Kamsku and humans, a relatively primitive race who moreover had no idea the Kalu-Kamsku existed and certainly had no experience in dealing with them, that the humans would come off worse. This was not the case. Why? I'm explaining why, impatient fledgling. Now pay attention, because here is the history lesson, and a valuable lesson it is. A Kalu-Kamsku armed recon team found a small human settlement on a world that had been marked for economic exploitation by their coordinator, which passes for their government. The settlement had not been there long. A few years, a decade at most, put up after the initial survey was conducted. As I said, the Kalu-Kamsku are uncompromising. Finding buildings where there were supposed to be none, they immediately set about burning them to the ground. It's entirely possible that they didn't realize that structures were made and inhabited by sentience. Semi-telepathic species are often like that. In the case of the Kalu-Kamsku, thoughts can be transmitted by pheromones, not good with theory of mind, since they already know the thoughts of other members of their species and therefore have no need to extrapolate. Thus, they aren't very good at recognizing sentience in alien species. I digress. I was saying that they burnt the human settlement to the ground? Well, they tried to at least, but they didn't get very far. Fortunately for scholars everywhere, a Kalu-Kamsku AR team has helmet-mounted recording equipment backed up to their ship's black box in real time. That, combined with the human accounts, gives us a fairly reliable account of what happened. The RT leader went up to the first building and, ignoring the unidentified creatures, humans running away from it, began to torch it with his arm-mounted flamer, making short work of it. The next building was slightly larger, 2 stories instead of 1, but the Kalu-Kamsku are big. They're 5 meters long, though their bodies are only 1 wide at most, and normally hold themselves a little under 2 meters off the ground. If they rear up on their 4 hind legs, they have 6 limbs, the front 2 pairs being used as legs or arms depending on the situation, they're even taller. The art leader shot a burst of flame into the ground floor, then reared up and shot a burst of flame in through the second floor window. For good measure, he let off a few bursts with the multi-purpose laser mounted on his other forelimb. So this avatar of destruction, along with his 19 other team members, is tearing through the human settlement, so far largely oblivious to the actual humans. However, he then spots a vehicle leaving the settlement and cripples it with a laser shot. Going up to finish it off with his flamer, he finds 4 humans. a male, a female, and two juveniles, a typical human family if you're interested in the exobiology of it, cowering in the wreckage. His recorders show that he definitely pauses here. Perhaps being a team leader, he was slightly less obtuse than most Kalu-Kamsku. Only for a moment, though. Then he raises his flamer to continue with the sterilization. It's at this point that he realizes that he no longer has a flamer, or the arm it was attached to for that matter. He lets out a great keening screech as he realizes he's been injured and backs away from the wrecked vehicle. There, standing between him and the human family, and next to his severed arm, is another human. A human in a fully encasing armored suit who had managed to creep up underneath him and remove his limb before he even noticed the human was there. A human holding a large kinetic pistol and a sword, an actual sword. The Kalu-Kamsku commander stares in astonishment for a moment. He's going into shock, but he still has a few minutes before he becomes catatonic. Then he realizes that he still has his combine laser mounted on his other arm. He brings it up, points it at the human, and fires. And the human simply steps aside. The human didn't actually dodge the laser blast, but he was so quick that in the time it took the ATR commander to bring the weapon to bear, aim, and pull the trigger, he was able to assess where the blast would land and simply move aside. That is how fast human reaction times are. The ART commander keeps firing, of course, but it doesn't do him any good. The last footage the helmet cam records is of a blur of movement passing beneath the unfortunate commander before, well, he was the first casualty in the human-Kamsku conflict. So who was this mysterious human with the sword? And why was he there? Well, that is the amazing thing. He was there for exactly the same reason the Kamsku AR team was. He was an armed scout who, along with 4 others, had gone to the planet to prepare the way for an invasion. Humanity is not a united polity, you see, and the faction that had sent the scouts was fighting, in a formalized manner that they call war, with the faction that had built the colony and intended to seize the planet from them. This was not an unusual state of affairs, by the way. The different human factions and the factions within factions were almost constantly fighting each other. But this is the important part. While the Kamsku were about as heavily armed as Kamsku get and still only really prepared for dangerous animals, the human scouts only had what humans considered the lightest weapons available and were still equipped enough to drive off the Kalu-Kamsku. The scouts were mostly only suitable for stealth operations, hence the sword. With a monomolecular electrostatically bonded edge, it could cut through just about anything. In silence. It worked too. The scout and his 4 partners cut through most of the Kamsku before they even realized anything was wrong. I should add that their active camouflage armor helped too. That was how the scout had gotten so close to the RT commander in the first place. In any case, the AR team was totally outclassed, and only 3 of the Kalu-Kamsku made it back to their ship, out of a team of 20. They could probably have bombarded the colony from orbit, but they were in such shock and barely capable of running their ship with so few of them that they scurried back to their home space as fast as their ship could take them. Are you confused yet? I certainly was when I first studied this. Intraspecies violence is not completely unheard of course. Mating rituals in particular often involve some degree of physical conflict. But still, it more often takes the form of aggressive displays with no injuries. The fact that humans routinely kill each other is shocking, but mass, organized violence? Certainly no other species has anything like human wars. Most conflicts within species that are not dealt with diplomatically, and negotiation is usually the favored, less costly strategy, are, like mating, resolved with displays of power. After all, why risk actual injury when it is easier to assess in advance who is the stronger? Perhaps it could be down to the fact that humans are a carnivorous hunter species. That is very unusual. Complex societies usually evolve from herd species, or flock in our case, which generally means that they were nearer the bottom end of the food chain when they evolved, and are probably herbivores. This holds true for most sentient species in the galaxy. We Amia subsist mainly on rich fruits found in the high canopy, where our flocks were hunted by geohawks in the infancy of our race. The Kalu-Kamsku built hives of wood pulp on their homeworld, and were hunted by mazu snakes when they left these to gather fungus from under tree bark. Each species has an ancestral predator which haunts their racial memory. Don't think I don't know that you sometimes take cut-out plastic wings and scare people by making hawk shadows. It's not funny. Yet although there are things on Earth, the human homeworld, that will eat humans, yes, I shudder to think of what could pose a threat to an adult human male. That is not what really frightens them. Watch some of their media sometime. I guarantee you that although you will see the occasional alien or monster, the vast majority of violence portrayed will be inflicted by other humans. For humans, the main threat to their survival, excluding diseases, which is another horror story in its own right, has always been other humans. This is what makes them so dangerous. Ignore the fact that they are carnivores. Put aside for a moment that they evolved both to hunt other animals and survive predation by things even more vicious than them. They are the only sentient species in the known galaxy that evolved to cope with predation by other sentients. When you or I feel threatened, our instinctive reaction is to find a leaf to hide under. And that's all it is. An instinct left over from our days as Gia prey. It's just a relic that's hung around in our hindbrain. And it's our only fear reaction, since hawks were our only major predators and hiding was the only effective strategy. We won't naturally try to run or fight, and if we encounter a situation that would call for this, it's difficult to force ourselves to. Our intellect may say one thing, but all our hindbrain says is hide. And we never encountered enough other threats to change this hardwiring. Likewise, the Kalu-Kamzu will rear up when threatened to make themselves look bigger, but they won't actually risk combat if they can run away, because against their homeworld predators, this would usually result in serious injury at the very least. Humans, however, take instinct to a whole new level, then take it beyond that. Their response when threatened has been constantly honed and constantly upgraded over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. Because since their main threat was usually other humans, the threats evolved with them. And on top of the base, physical evolution, their cultural evolution has been similarly affected. A significant portion of almost all human cultures has been dedicated to making humans who are better at killing other humans, warriors. In many cultures, this is actually a separate caste whose entire lives are dedicated to making themselves better at killing enemy humans. If you want further study, the archetype of this is the European knight and the Japanese samurai. Although if you ever met a human and asked them, I'm sure they would debate you at great length about which culture produced the better warriors. And don't ask, by the way. Most of the answer won't make sense to you anyway, and you would be happier not hearing the bits that do. Humanity evolved while engaging in a constant arms race. Imagine if, when we first developed hawk nets, the hawks had come up with a means to cut through them, then matched every other solution we came up with. Not a pretty thought, is it? Yet this is normal for humanity. And it produced a species that is incredibly fast, incredibly tough, not as big as some, but weight for weight extremely strong. Even though they are smaller than the Kalu-Kamzu are, there are few bigger than them in fact, if that first encounter had taken place without weapons, the scouts would probably have had the strength to simply tear off the Kamzu's limbs. And most importantly of all, they have the neural architecture to go with their biological weaponry. Unlike every other species in the galaxy, evolving to fight other sentients meant that they haven't just had to outfight their opponents, they've had to outthink them as well. Some of the most recognizable figures in human culture are those who fought other humans, not in personal combat, but with their organizational skills and strategies. Humans value intelligence in conflict, at least as much as they value physical violence, and their reactions to threats are extremely complex and very adaptable. I imagine you're all quite frightened by now. Well, you should be. I've portrayed humans as unstoppable killing machines, which is more or less the truth. But remember also that they are sentient, and therefore capable of great complexity. Has anyone been paying attention enough to notice the part of my story that didn't make sense? The human scouts were on that planet to attack the colony, yes? So why did they come to its defense when the Kalu-Kamzu attacked? I suppose you might think that they wanted the buildings intact or something. Dilettantes in the field of human study will often try to pass this off as the explanation. In fact, it is considerably more complicated. War, apparently, is not just a free-for-all where one side tries to kill as many of the other before their own faction is exterminated. Humans may be savage, but they are far from mindless. There are rules, which is what distinguishes war from simply killing other humans. These rules are convoluted, but mostly concern who can and can't be killed. Enemies who put down their weapons and surrender themselves are generally not allowed to be killed, for example. Members of the enemy faction who do not actually fight, civilians, are also supposed to be left alone. These rules vary in consistency and application, but one almost universal taboo is against the killing of juveniles. The human scouts might well have remained hidden as per their orders if the Kamsku hadn't provoked them by attacking a human family with young. If you ever decide to take up xenocultural studies, go out into the galaxy and actually meet some humans, and you want to know how not to get yourself disemboweled lengthways like that Kalu Kamsku art commander, it's simple. Never ever threaten a human child. There are other guidelines when dealing with humans, of course, but obey this simple rule and you could probably go around Earth all on your own without ever getting torn limb from limb. I did, in my student days. Just because a human can kill you with barely any effort doesn't mean he particularly wants to. What happened with the humans and the Kamsku after the colony incident? The Kamsku sent a fleet to eliminate the threat, still not actually understanding what the threat was, and promptly was sent running by a combined human fleet. After the scouts of one faction came to the aid of another settlement, they found it a lot easier to put aside their differences. The surveillance footage taken by the scouts of horrifying alien monsters helped as well. In fact, all human factions united against the aliens. Although the human ships were less technologically sophisticated, they had far more ships built specifically for combat, and the complex tactical maneuvers of humans' fleets used to fighting space battles with each other were no match for Kamsku's strategy, which was simply advance and shoot. What few ground engagements there were usually ended as massacres. Remember, the scout team that wiped out 4 times their number of Kamsku were lightly armed by human standards. It finally occurred to the Kalu Kamsku to ask why this was happening, and after thoroughly analyzing their new enemy and finding them to be sentient, they finally managed to reach out to humans and establish a dialogue. It may surprise you to know that humans were perfectly ready to stop killing Kamsku and make peace. If anyone tries to get into a debate on how such a deadly species stopped the killing so easily, and this still passes for intellectual discussion at some schools, don't. The answer is perfectly simple. They had never encountered aliens before, and they were fascinated. As much as they were outraged by the attack on the colony, they were more interested in gaining information about the first other sentient species they'd discovered. As I said, humans are complex creatures. Not that they got much out of the Kalu Kamsku, but the conflict had drawn the attention of the other star-faring species in the galaxy. Thus, the cultural exchange began. Today, there are humans all over the galaxy studying the various species and cultures out there. There are even some on our world at the moment. In fact, and this was very difficult to arrange, but if one of you would kindly open that door, right here now, is... Oh, you should have seen the looks on your faces. You were about to dive under the tables. Oh, I'm sorry, but that was just too good. You might want to think of this next time you're tempted to go out with plastic hawk wings. Sadly, I don't have any deadly humans here to show you. Even more sadly, this is the end of the lesson. Just as well, I need to stretch my wings. We've been in here a while, haven't we? Although from the look of it, it'll be a few minutes before you lot will go outside where there isn't a nice, thick roof over your heads. Anyway, what then should we take away from this? Well, that'll be the topic of your assignment, actually, but as a simple summary, I'll say this. Never, ever get into a conflict with humans. And if you absolutely can't avoid it, then for goodness sake, get other humans to do the actual fighting for you. It's what they were made for, after all. What? The target is a human... No, I heard what you said. What? There's no way in the galaxy anyone could be that monumentally stupid. I was led to believe that the Black Hand assassins could kill anything. You keep that name out of your thrice damn mouth around here, whelp. We had to abandon that name after the bad deal with the Delphin Empire years ago. I don't care about any empire. I want you to kill a human. The assassin's mandibles clicked angrily in agitation. We don't take contracts to kill humans. Then I'll just contract someone else. You can try. None of the other guilds in the galaxy will take that job. And even if you found an independent with a death wish, they won't get the job done. Not without them either dying or ratting you out. You can't really believe that humans are unkillable. I never said they were unkillable. Quite the contrary. I personally know that they are definitely mortal, but we don't take on contracts to kill them. Why in all the hell's not? Because the only way to kill a human and live long enough to enjoy the money for the job is to drop a neutron bomb on them from orbit just to be safe. Then you grab the fastest ship you can and book it before the rest of the humans find out what you did. After that, I suggest finding a way to another galaxy and staying there for the rest of your miserable life. You're having me on. Tell me, does the planet you come from have compulsory education? What does that have to do with anything? Indulge me. Yes, 10 years of basically teaching our young how to be as obedient as a Rastian drone. Sounds about right for any government-run public education. You learn any history lessons there? Some. They must not teach galactic history then. Sit. Buy a round, and I'll tell you why no assassin worth their blade will take on a contract to kill a human. The drinks were ordered, and the old assassin took a long drag on his before he turned to his new drinking companion. You remember I mentioned the Delphin Empire? Yes. What of it? Do you know what happened to them? Their empire broke after they poured too many resources into trying to tame a death world. That death world is the human cradle world. And the planet didn't break the Delphin, the humans did. How? The assassin took another long drag of his beer. The Delphin Empire used to rule this half of the galaxy. Hundreds of species and civilizations held in thrall or crushed into dust. Serve or die, that was the Delpan way. The council that presided over what wasn't Delpan territory back then could do little to stop the ever-churning war machine that drove Delpan expansion. They would posture and debate and even beg, but nothing they did could slow the inexorable march of the Delpan. System by system, the galaxy was falling under the rule of the Emperor. Then, they happened upon a system that was called Sol by its inhabitants. The name wasn't being used for any other system, so the Delpan let them keep it. The humans resided on the third planet in the system. Poor sods. They had just started really exploring their home system when the Delpan came knocking. The humans were divided into various socio-economic groups that they called countries. This made it easier for the Delpan, as the fractured nations of humans were slow to respond, and the legions swept across the land without their next target being any wiser about their doom approaching thanks to communication jammers. Despite all these disadvantages, the humans resisted mightily. 1 galactic standard month. That's how long it took for the Delphin to claim dominion over the planet. Most pre-FTL worlds fell within a week, but those humans fought like demons, especially when the remaining countries finally figured out that they were being invaded. They even managed to bring the Delpan ground troops to a halt once before reinforcements were dropped and the last bastion of resistance fell. From there, it was the usual boring administrative tedium, splitting the new slaves into work groups and assigning them jobs that would ultimately benefit their new overlords. Many of the surviving humans were farmers and ranchers, so the Delpan let them do what they were good at. An army marches on its stomach, I believe is the old human saying. And the Delpan war machine was hungry indeed. A few 100,000 were taken off-world to work in the mines elsewhere. Those humans are unnaturally strong and durable due to the high gravity of their world, so they excelled at the dangerous task of mining. The worlds and species conquered by the Delpan usually followed a handful of events as though they were reading from the same script. First, there was a year or two where the overlords and administrators would have to be very liberal with the whip until the slaves learned the new order of things. Then there'd be a few years of relative peace, followed by a period of rebellions and uprisings 5 to 10 years after the initial conquest. Once those were beaten down, there usually wasn't enough fight left to try again, so the survivors just gave up hope. These humans didn't follow the script. They grudgingly fell in line a few months after the invasion was done, and when the expected uprisings never happened. I imagine the Delpan were feeling pretty proud of themselves for beating the fight out of the primates. If I only had one compliment to give the humans, it would be this. They are natural hunters. They know how to wait patiently for the perfect time to strike. For 20 Earth years, the humans worked and lived and bred like cling rats. Not that the Delphin cared how many more humans were being born, more meat for the grinder, they would say. They would even give incentives like extra rations and special privileges if a human female produced more than 4 offspring. If only the Delphin knew. The humans weren't breeding more workers. They were growing an army. The human administrators and rulers that surrendered to the Delphin were at least half fake. Puppets sent to give the illusion of surrender while the real governments hid underground, literally in some cases, and continued to direct their forces. Hidden training camps, nighttime schools, secretly printed pamphlets about how to one day throw off the chains of oppression. Those humans were clever in hiding it all from their overlords. Then, when the Delpan warfront was dozens of systems away on their conquest of the galaxy, it was time. The humans' leaders, long hidden in their secret holes, had been planning while scraps of stolen Delpan tech were being meticulously reverse-engineered by their scientists. They had been gathering resources for their rebellion since they surrendered. While the Delpan had been gloating, the humans were preparing, and now, finally ready, they made their move. It was small at first, all rebellions are, a rogue miner refusing to work here, a rancher telling his overlord that his entire herd was wiped out by some non-existent disease there, a factory explosion over here. Larger disturbances to production soon followed. The human country of France, with its long history of rebelling against tyrants, would riot in the streets while crying out, "Vive la Revolution!" Don't ask me what in the hell's that means. I never bothered learning human languages. A crate of plasma rifles went missing. Then a grav tank wouldn't start. When they popped the hood, they found it to be completely gutted of all power and anti-grav components. The Delpan leaders thought these problems were beneath them but still needed addressing, so they called the Black Hand Assassins and other guilds like ours to deal with the rabble-rousers. Our services cost the Empire a tidy sum, I can tell you. That planet of the humans, dirt, I think they call it, is at least 3 times the galactic average gravity. Every agent we sent had to be fitted with a grav assist suit and spent a week after making planetfall getting used to it. At first, our agents thought that the human rebels were ghosts. They could see the after effects of sabotage, but never any evidence to prove who had done it. They would be patrolling streets when suddenly the streets would empty. Before the agent could wonder where the humans had all gone, an explosion would rock the street, sometimes taking the agent with it. One of our agents got so angered by the death of a friend that he went to a random, completely unrelated town and started executing humans when they couldn't answer his questions about who was responsible. Unsurprisingly, a mob turned on him after the 3rd execution and tore him to pieces. I can't even blame the Delphin for not paying the death fee for that one. Our contract was to stop riots, not cause them. The contract was quickly going bad. Sure, we were killing humans like we were being paid to with the kind of surgical precision we were known for, but what good is money if you can't even make it off-world to spend it? Before long, we couldn't walk on the surface of their planet without heavy escort by Delphin troops. The humans would strike without warning and fade into the background. On the human continent of Africa, an agent was lured onto the savannah as he was chasing one of the human rebels, only to find himself set upon by a pack of feline predators. Those humans had even wrangled the lesser beasts of their world into fighting. The number of agents we lost to the humans' canine companion species cannot easily be counted. And the less I say about the death trap the humans call Australia, the happier I shall be. First, one regional administration center fell silent, then another. By the time the Delpan nobles finally took notice of this new problem, the entire planet had fallen silent. And not just dirt, but anywhere that a human had been taken to work was showing similar signs of resistance. One can only assume that they had been fostering rebellious notions with the other slave species of the Delpan. The gods only know how they managed to communicate with each other across the void of space. Before you say anything, yes. The Delpan did have patrol vessels meandering throughout the region to suppress just this kind of thing, but those had fallen silent too. The humans had gotten spies aboard and either destroyed or captured the vessels. These too were sent to their scientists to be examined, and now, without Delpan supervision, the The humans uncovered the secret factories and forces they had been cultivating for years. Huge manufactories churning out components for space docks, and eventually starships that the newly uncovered launch facilities hurled into orbit to the tune of several thousands of tons per day. By the time the light response vessels made it to human space, they were no match for the humble fleet the humans had managed to build with stolen Delpan technology. It is no falsehood to say that the Delpan were victims of their own hubris. Every time they lost a response vessel or patrol fleet, they would just send another. They were too focused on expanding their borders to recognize the rot eating away at their empire from within. When the Delpan finally got tired enough of the cost of sending light response fleets into the area to pull a conquest fleet from the front, the human world and the next 3 conquered systems in any direction had fallen silent. When the conquest fleet arrived 10 systems out from Sol, they faced a fleet of not just humans, but all of the slave species in the region. After that victory for the humans, the Delpan Emperor must have been getting nervous. All of his fleets were halfway across the galaxy, and the humans were sat between him and his armies. An emergency call went out for all fleets to immediately recall directly to the Imperial capital, and any guilds like the Black Hand were called in to assist. By that time, we had lost almost 2/3 of our guild, so we refused the call. It ultimately saved us. The humans, after decades of clandestine operations, were well versed in ferreting out spies and saboteurs within their own ranks. 7 other assassin guilds were completely wiped out. We knew it was a fool's errand, no matter how much the Empire was willing to pay. While the Delpan fleet gathered in their home system, plans were made to meticulously spread out and scour the empire of the rebels. This ended up being the final nail in the coffin. You see, while the Delpan Empire consolidated and planned, the humans spread quickly through the now enemy-free void and went to every subservient species in the Empire, threw down the Delpan administrators controlling them, and gathered them to the cause. Everywhere the humans went, they fanned the flames of rebellion, and the galaxy burned. The ineffective council in the part of the galaxy that had yet to be conquered by the Empire had eagerly joined with the humans in their fight. Throughout the Empire, the oppressed and enslaved were throwing off their shackles by the trillions and raising their fists in defiance. Forge worlds still churned out ships, and agri-worlds still raised crops and livestock. But for the new Galactic Alliance, not for the Delphin. Cut off from the supply lines that kept the Delpan Empire running, internal strife started to take hold within the Imperial forces. Fleets of conquest went out from the Imperial capital and never made it more than a dozen systems before they were pounced upon by the Human Alliance. Much like on their home world, the humans would strike like lightning and disappear into the black. Try as they did, the Delpan fleets were never quite able to pin down the humans in a fair fight. This went on for months as the Delpan legions were slowly bled dry. Ambushes, false distress signals, EMP mines hidden in clouds of wreckage. Nothing was beneath the humans, so long as the enemy could be destroyed. When the Allied fleets finally breached Delpan Prime, they found a starving and fractured fleet tearing itself to pieces. When the human admiral hailed the fractured flotilla and the Delpan captains saw the sheer scale of the armada before them, they surrendered straight away. With the rebellion now finished, after 3 years of fighting, the humans unleashed the most vicious weapon in their arsenal: lawyers. They dragged the Delpan Emperor himself from his throne, and all of the Delpan nobles and administrators and lash holders that had ever oppressed a sapient being were rounded up. And then the humans drugged them through what is now our modern court system. It was far and away more civilized than Delpan Court, where the accused would be brought before the emperor or a representative, charges would be read, and the accused would be shot without even the ability to defend themselves. By the time the trials were finished, the emperor had died of old age, and his successor was made to right the wrongs done to the galaxy. The empire was broken, and all that is left of the Delpan is a few systems in the far reaches of the galactic southern arm. Many feared that the humans would turn around and conquer the galaxy for themselves. However, within a year of the Delpan surrender, the humans had dismantled over half of their fleet and scattered the rest around the galaxy for pirate hunting and general peacekeeping. Our guild was extremely lucky that the humans understood that we had broken our contract. They let us live with the promise that the Black Hand would be permanently dismantled. Those humans whittled us down to a mere third of our number before the rebellion even left their home planet. A third. We were the top assassin guild in the galaxy, and now we are a loose, unnamed group of independent agents. So, you see, young one, we don't kill humans. You kill a human, and their family will hunt you down. If you kill their family, the species will hunt you down. And you had better pray they kill you, because if their lawyers get their hands on you, you'll be lucky if your own people are forced to kill you as an apology. I had no idea. That is painfully obvious. I'm not usually one to pry into a customer's business, but what did this human do to offend you anyway? They insulted my broodmate. The assassin laughed. Ha! Is that all? Then insult them back, you moron. If it really bothered you, then punch them in the face. But you said, we don't kill humans, but those crazy apes love to fight with words as well as their fists. And you'll have a better chance of survival that way. Chances are you wouldn't be able to physically hurt them, but if you took the time to explain to them that you were offended, they may even apologize. They would do that? They are monsters on the field of battle and demons when they have been wronged, but they are not uncivilized. If they were, they couldn't have rebuilt the council to what it is today. They hold the head chair position and will likely do so for generations to come. They are a firm race, but fair in their adjudication. The assassin drained the last drops in his glass and looked balefully at the empty vessel. Now then, my cup is empty. Unless you wish to fill it again, I think we're done here. What? The target is a Hue. Except the humans. When our coalition's exploration drones found the Sol system, we knew just from initial scans that there was nothing much of note there. Most of the planets there were completely devoid of life of any kind. Just a handful of barren rocks and gas giants. The only planet that was interesting was the third planet, which scans showed to be filled with life. Over the next several days, our probe scouted the Earth. While it could not see much through the immense amount of space debris that littered the planet, apparently from failed launches into space, it got some intel on what was on the surface. There was a diversity of flora and fauna, an abundance of liquid water that shockingly was littered with specks of stagnant islands of debris, and a sapient species known as humans that seemed to be the cause of the somewhat common structures and the aforementioned space debris. Scans showed there to be just about 8 billion members of this race. The probe continued onwards after a couple weeks of scanning the surface. Its primary mission was to explore a newly discovered system that seemed to be rich in resources, and it wouldn't stop for some out-of-the-way planet on the edge of nowhere. Sure, the humans had realized that they could go to space, but by the amount of debris hovering around their planet, all of their attempts had basically failed. It seemed to most scientists that the humans would need another 400 years before they made ships capable of leaving the Earth, and even more to discover FTL travel on their own. We had never seen such a pitifully slow race before. Most species that tried to get to space would immediately make it their main goal to break the confines of their home planet. Except, well, the humans. Sometime later, a conflict broke between two member races of the coalition, the powerful, warlike Zanzi and the somewhat newer and much more docile Danik. Everyone knew the Danik were the victims in this war, but knew that they would face the wrath of the Zanzi's powerful military if they interceded. So the Zanzi ships easily glassed and sterilized one world, captured their other planet without so much as a sweat, and used their influence in the Senate to convince their allies and some swing races to kick the Danik out of the coalition. Nobody tried to defend the Danik. They were a fledgling member race, with no representatives in the government, with few outstanding qualities to speak of. Only 10 billion members, a nearly non-existent military, which may have been part of the reason why the Zanzi invaded, and only a handful of FTL-capable ships. They were almost as pitiful as the humans, as one senator noted. And it might be best to send them to the Sol system and test the humans. It would be a waste of resources, after all, to send an actually important race and a new fleet to greet the humans. Why not use the Danik? So the 52 large Danik colony ships and numerous smaller civilian freighters and transports, all carrying their share of the 7 billion who survived the war and weren't enslaved by the Zanzi, jumped on their own to the Sol system, with no support and no turning back. Their ships were packed to the seams with refugees, people with no home to go back to. Nobody would be happy to greet them in the state that they were in. Except, apparently, the humans. Several weeks went by before our second probe reached the Sol system, purpose-built to study how the human and Danik races interacted. By the time it arrived, it brought back news of what happened. The human governments of Earth, and yes, there were many of them, had accepted the Danik into their society. Their planet was teeming with construction, and about half of the ships that arrived at their destination were still orbiting space. Most of the space debris, curiously, was cleared out. It would be a while until they were fully adapted, though. Nobody could handle so many refugees at once. Except, as we found out, the humans. As the few researchers tasked with watching the drone footage saw, the residents of Earth adapted extraordinarily quickly to their new situation. They built new structures at blistering speed, utilizing massive machines that simply printed entire cities in just a few weeks. Danik freighters that once shipped cargo now moved in the asteroid belt, mining materials to build new structures and, most surprisingly, new ships. The humans had apparently learned to reverse engineer virtually every technology that Danik had to offer, from particle shields to FTL drives. Vehicles that once were wheeled or tracked were converted to hold anti-gravity nodes. New unique ships, supposedly of human design, were built, and to our shock they proved even faster than the Danik ships to precede them. Never had we seen such industriousness before. On most planets it took months to build a new ship, and another month if it was to have an FTL drive, which were somewhat rare throughout the Coalition. Most Coalition ships relied on sunlight engines as FTL drives were too complicated to mass produce and too expensive to make standard issue. Only wealthy intersystem traders or large military carriers or battleships had them, while most other smaller ships like cruisers and frigates didn't have them at all. And on this previously ignored planet, new ships would be built and launched in a week. While some would hover around Earth or the local moon, most would immediately make use of their FTL drives and punch a hole in time-space, traveling to who knows where. By now, our leaders were growing both curious and anxious at this new threat to their way of life. Zanzi generals were vocal about seizing whatever made the humans so efficient, and our Senate capitulated and allowed the Zanzi to assemble a strike force to take back what they believed was rightfully theirs. 100 massive ships, including carriers, destroyers, battleships, frigates, and even a planet-killing dreadnought, all packed with enough firepower to simply subjugate another member race if they wanted. Thousands of small fighters, hundreds of troop transports, and landing craft for the eventual takeover of planet Earth. A single planet against the might of a full Zanzi fleet was a pushover, no matter how prepared you were. And there was no way Earth was prepared after only a year since the Danik first appeared at their doorstep. Most races would surrender immediately and hope to get away with their lives, as the Danik did after just 2 days of fighting. Except, of course, the humans. As soon as the Zanzi fleet arrived near the system's largest gas giant to regroup and begin their attack, a small fleet of a dozen cruiser-class ships assembled near Earth to defend their home. As the Zanzi approached the asteroid belt, the fleet grew steadily until it matched the Zanzi in size, as more ships jumped in from seemingly nowhere. And when the Zanzi crossed the belt, the human fleet sped to meet them in the middle, on a small red planet called Mars. When both forces collided, the battle was more even than anyone thought it could be. Although the Danik ships originally had poor shields and weaponry just a year prior, the human cruisers and battleships seemed to match their Zanzi counterparts, trading blow for devastating blow. The Zanzi fleet was whittled down to 50 ships, including their flagship dreadnought, and a few carriers meant for subjugating a planet, battling against 60 human cruisers and destroyers, all intent on driving back the enemy. Eventually, the Zanzi decided to retreat. The dreadnought turned away from Earth, attempting to jump back to friendly territory before it was destroyed. Before it and the remaining ships could, though, the three largest human carriers released a small wave of fast troop transports, numbering nearly 500, each directed at a specific Zanzi ship. While the fleet was attempting to flee, they failed to see the transports punch into their ships' hulls and lock in before jumping away into a nearby Allied system, human Marines in tow. The scouting probe watched as the human ships hovered near Mars, as if waiting for the Zanzi ships to return and renew their attack. But the Zanzi ships were gone for good. They had retreated. Never once had a Zanzi full fleet been so battered that they were forced to fall back. No race's military was capable of standing up to them in a battle and going toe-to-toe. Except, evidently, the humans. The Zanzi leaders were shocked at the defeat. An entire full fleet and 4 million servicemen reduced to quarter strength by the effort of a single planet and what were a bunch of fumbling apes just 400 days ago? There was outrage at this turn of events, and the Zanzi generals called for the Flag Admiral to be reprimanded, executed, and perhaps even demoted to midshipman afterwards. However, communications with the flagship Dreadnought were never answered, and the ship was presumed destroyed. This was even worse. One of their prize flagships destroyed? Those ships were the top of the line, and there were only 9 of them in the entire coalition. It was unfathomable. The Zanzi prepared to mobilize their entire military, since the rest of the coalition didn't want to step in for a number of reasons. Their 4 remaining full fleets combined together and prepared to rendezvous with the survivors of their expeditionary force. On arrival, the fleet admirals were in for a pleasant surprise. Their prized dreadnought was not, in fact, destroyed. It hovered in place, surrounded by its supporting carriers and battleships, all 4 massive planet-killing cannons, charged and ready. This, too, came as a surprise to the fleet admirals. It was standard protocol to never keep dreadnought cannons charged unless you were ready to fire. Otherwise, your ship's power would be drained, your shields would falter, and your cooling systems would eventually fail to do their job. It was too late that the 4 Zanzi admirals realized what had happened. By the time the call went out to engage evasive maneuvers, to divert all power to shields, to charge their own cannons, or to abandon ship entirely, as all 4 flagships had, in the chaos, forgotten to communicate with one another. The dreadnought facing them had fired its cannons with perfect accuracy. Each huge blast of energy, with the power of 1,000 nuclear warheads behind it, hit its target head-on. The force of the explosion wasn't enough to completely destroy the dreadnoughts, but it eliminated their shields, knocked out their main and backup reactors, and obliterated most of their support ships in the direct vicinity. As the 4 flagships went dark, all systems offline, the admirals watched through the glass windows of their bridges as the 60 human ships their colleague had faced in battle jumped in, turned towards the dreadnoughts, and launched waves of strike craft. 4 days later, the Zanzi signed a treaty of unconditional surrender to the newly formed Terran Union. It surrendered all of their slaves, surrendered their technology, and stated that they no longer owned the 5 dreadnoughts that the joint human Danyik military now occupied, hovering ominously over the Zanzi homeworld's capital. Never had anyone stood up to the most powerful force in the galaxy and turned its own weapons against it. Not once had the Zanzi suffered a defeat so crushing, a defeat that would never again allow them to be as mighty as they once were. It seemed that nothing would ever be as powerful as they once were, except, well, the humans.
When the human race was first recognized by the Galactic Council, not much was thought of them. Basic tolerance to both heat and cold, and a decent power-to-weight ratio. The only thing mildly impressive about them was that they were one of the few non-apex predator species to rise to sentience, much less to the space age. However, in saying that they were considered a species lacking in any amounts of honor, a death of even one of their leaders would spark a war of succession lasting for years. In a sense, they are certainly not the worst species in the galaxy, but they are a far cry from the best. The Taraxi were the first galactic race to consider exploiting the weakness of humans. Thus they waited for the inevitable spark that would lead to all of human civilization to blood and war. 27 years after being recognized by the council that spark the Taraxi waited so long for, raged into an all-encompassing inferno that engulfed the entirety of the human race. The images that came out of the first week of conflict still haunt me. I don't know how a race can practice such death on its own people. There was no compassion, no honor, just the cold calculation of slaughter. When the human conflict was entering its twilight stages, the Taraxi struck. Millions of Taraxi troops and battleships poured into human-controlled territory. One by one, their planets fell, and in the millions, the humans died. The rest of the galaxy turned away. The humans were on the brink of annihilation, and no one wanted a part in that. Some even helped with the Taraxi invasion with provisions and weaponry in return for conquered human territory. The human race was at its end. However, instead of fading inelegantly into extinction, the humans did something incomprehensible. They united. Years of animosity and hatred gone in mere weeks. People who not 3 months ago pledged to the slaughter of one another now greeted each other as brothers. The once unstoppable Taraxi advance grinded to a halt. After conquering almost 73% of human territory in 6 weeks, they now failed to push another light year after 8 months of conflict. The Taraxi has done something extremely dangerous. They had given humanity a common enemy. 2 years after the Taraxi-human conflict began, the unthinkable started to happen. The Taraxi were being pushed back. The Taraxi media claimed it to be a strategic move to cause huge human casualties. That may have been true. The humans might have been using enormous amounts of resources to gain back control of their territories. However, once recovered, it was never retaken. As explained to me by a colleague of mine, the humans would, as they say, simply dig in. An insane concept to simply sit on reconquered territory and let the Taraxi come to them. And come they did. The Taraxi battered the human lines again and again and again. Then just when it looked like the humans were content with the territory they had retaken, they launched massive counter-offensives that forced the Taraxi into yet another scrambling retreat. A truly insane tactic, and yet it was working out to be a brutally effective method of war. The Taraxi would not admit then, and probably never will, they were losing. 6 years have now passed since the beginning of what is now the largest war in 500 years of galactic history. The Council had assumed that the humans would cease hostilities once all conquered human territory was back in human hands. The Council, of course, had assumed wrong. Not only did the humans not stop hostilities once all of their territory was retaken for all intents and purposes, it appeared that the humans wanted to erase the threat to their species. No more than that, the humans wanted blood. They wanted revenge for the human blood on Taraxi hands, and nothing would get in their way. In one of the most ridiculous twists of fate, the Taraxi were now fighting for their right to exist. The Council, in a state of panic, called for an emergency peace talk between the humans and the Taraxi. To everyone's surprise, that humans agreed, thus the first ceasefire since the outbreak of war was implemented. Taraxi, human, and the 9-member Council races sat for peace talks. The discussion brokering for peace went well. The humans once again surprised. They held themselves well and spoke with reason and understanding to the Council races. However, they steadfastly refused to engage with the Taraxi. Looking back, it might have been a sign of things to come. However, at the time I thought it understandable. As I was part of the diplomatic mission, I had hopes that an end to the conflict would be close at hand. That was until the discussion of reimbursement was brought up by the Taraxi, as was their right as the conquered party, to demand equal monetary compensation for any of their lands still held by human forces at the signing of the treaty. The entirety of the human party fell silent as they heard the Taraxi ambassador first speak of it. Finally, after some time, one of their members spoke up. "Please tell me this is some kind of joke to commemorate the start of peace." The member for Chennai spoke up. "Of course not. It is their right to ask of that, and it is your duty to comply. To not do so is simply..." The member for Chennai paused for a moment. "Incomprehensible." The human party fell silent yet again. The leader of the human party stood and stated calmly, "You will have our answer within the hour." Without another word, he left the room, followed wordlessly by the entire human party. The council, pleased with the outcome of the talks, all sighed with relief. It appeared that the humans were willing to back off. And so we waited for the humans to respond with an acceptance of peace. To the second on the hour the council received a human message, it was the human leader. For several seconds, all I could see on the vid screen was the human as he simply sat staring at us with a peculiar look, not talking, not moving, simply looking. Blasted human emotions, the member for Chennai suddenly stated. So goddamn hard to read. Computer identify emotion. The computer chimed to indicate it had completed its analysis. Emotion identified, barely contained ray. The human leader abruptly spoke over the top of the computer. My dear council members, he turned to smile at the Taraxi member. Member for the Taraxi, I regret to inform you that we cannot accept the terms for peace as they stand. Within an instant there was silence for the first time since the start of peace talks. Still smiling at the Taraxi member, however, we are willing to compromise. A Taraxi Solider suddenly burst into the room. Sir, the human ships are on the move. The vid screen cut into two. Half on the human leader, the other showed the Taraxi homeworld surrounded by the entire human armada. The Taraxi member spluttered and turned to speak with the human leader. What? How? When did you do this? The human leader just continued to smile. Then, without warning, the human armada opened fire. Within seconds, thousands of years' worth of Taraxi culture was incinerated, billions of innocents dead before they could comprehend the horror befalling them. One of the greatest empires in the galaxy was simply no more. No one moved, no one spoke. Even the Taraxi's grief was soundless. The human leader spoke up again. As you can see, we have decided to compromise. 16 billion of my fellow humans have died since the outbreak of this conflict. Everyone turned stunned to look at the human leader trying to take in the immense loss of life. I feel that trading 10 billion innocent Taraxi for 16 billion innocent humans is a more than fair compromise. Even I could tell the word compromise was laced with venom and scorn, the human leader continued. As a race, we are now open to any negotiation of peace. Are you insane? Roared the member from Chennai. You have just declared war on the entire Galactic Council. Peace? This is as far from peace that any being can achieve. There will be no peace until your vile race is wiped out from even the memories of my grandchildren. The human leader turned his still, smiling face to the member of Chennai. Good. The human leader no longer attempted to contain the rage pouring from his eyes. I was hoping you would say that. 14 days have passed since the Taraxi-human war ended. There was no peace treaty, no surrender, no ceasefire. One side simply did not have a people anymore. It has been a long 14 days since the Galactic Council declared war on the humans. 4 council races have defected from the council, all of them disgraced at the council's initial inaction and lack of prevention of human loss of life at the opening stages of the Taraxi-human war. All 4 of the defecting races voted to stop the Taraxi when they first began to show an interest in the humans, all bullied into inaction by the Chennai. It's unthinkable that 4 races have defected from the council. But then again, this is the first time in 570 years that the Council is at war, and not since its formation has it been at war with itself. Humans, in 34 years, they have torn down millennia worth of tradition, cooperation, and understanding. Oi, mate! Grinned my new friend sitting next to me, waking me from my daydream. He was absently picking his nails with a metallic close combat weapon. Not having second thoughts on me, are ya? I grinned back. Not on your life, my friend. This will be the first time in nearly 600 years that the Honorak have been to war. I looked to my friend sitting next to me and my grin broadened. No, my friend, on the contrary, it has been much too long. This shall be fun. His grin burst into an all-out laugh. Just stay alive long enough and I'll show you how to cook the perfect steak. I shook my head at him. Humans, truly insane.
I looked carefully over the casualty reports on my screen. Scanner reports noted only a few million humans were still alive. Scattered pockets of survivors over small areas on one continent. The others had either been cleansed completely or simply glassed by the fleet. During the opening stages of the attack, it was pretty simple. The hardest targets were hit first, military installations and aircraft facilities. Basically anything that could aim at us, we immediately vaporized. A sizable nuclear armament was sent against us, but it was meaningless against our ship shields. They stopped fighting us after a cycle. Now it was a simple matter of finishing the job and collecting a few slaves. My lord, a quiet, weaselly voice from behind me spoke. What? Can't you see I'm busy? I spun my chair around and looked at one of the weakling subordinates. My lord, oh radiant one, Castilia has a report for you." He groveled, offering a data pad. I took it and looked at the report. "This makes no sense. How—" I put my hand on my forehead and involuntarily chuckled. "So the locals have some fight in them. Send Daedalus Legion down. All of it." Just then my communications array chimed. Captain Verulus of the Castilia. How charming. "My Lord Radiance, I have news." How quaint of you to think you can contact me direct. "One of my fleet cruisers is not responding to my hail. Her shields and engine are shut down. I need authorization to send in a repair crew. Flay me later if you must, but I need authorization." He barked. I could sense a tone of desperation in his voice. "Why, Verulus, is that fear I detect in your voice?" I said with a smile. I was looking forward to his insolence punishment later. Communicator chimed again. 2 more captains. "My Lord Radiance, my entire engineering crew has vanished. My ship's shields are failing. My Lord Radiance, I have lost contact with one of my enslavement teams. They aren't responding to any hails." His voice was one of unnatural concern. "Silence!" I barked at them and called them to order instantly. It would appear the locals are putting up some resistance. "Captain Renari, send forth the entirety of Daedalus Legion. We can find slaves some other day. Just finish them." I ordered and returned to my readouts. An hour passed, and I looked wistfully over my fleet. My jubilation suddenly cut short at the sight of a frigate suddenly breaking formation and charging towards the planet. "What was that? Why did that ship break formation?" I barked into the command module. "We know not, my Lord Radiance. The ship just cut comms and left. We need not care, my Lord Radiance. At the speed it's going, it will disintegrate on contact with the ground," my underling said from behind me. "I don't care. What is going on? What happened to Daedalus Legion? Have they been deployed yet?" I spun in my chair to face my underling. I noticed something out of my right eye. I got up and looked around. Nothing but shadows. "My Lord Radiance, is something the matter?" No, just shadows." "What is the report on Daedalus Legion?" I asked, taking care to move slowly as I scanned the room. "I swear I saw something." "No, my lord. I shall contact them immediately. They landed about 10 minutes ago. They should be—" The lights flickered. Once again, I saw that shadow out of the corner of my eye. "Oh my! I shall contact engineering immediately, my Lord Radiance." My underling squirmed and squelched out the door. I sat back in my seat and looked at the reports again. As I drew a cup of Omegon to my lips, I sputtered as I read out a report. I nearly choked on the juice in my hand. 6 ships in my fleet had gone dark. 2 cruisers, 3 frigates, and 1 corvette. Their engines just shut down. Shields gone and just went silent. I quickly typed on a few keys and ordered surrounding ships to investigate. I looked out of the viewing port and noted which ships were moving. One ship had its lights and engine go out as it was approaching. I knew that ship. I chuckled to myself as I realized something. As I typed its comm channel into the network, I suddenly realized, "Hey, wait a second. Its power is out. It can't even pick up any comms I send." I chuckled at my own lapse of judgment and sat back in my seat. A few minutes later, the report came back. Every crew member was gone. No traces of any signs of anything at all, not even paw prints. The entire crew had vanished after just switching their ship off. No escape pods launched. No cowardly attempts at suicide. Nothing. As I read the reports, I kept getting that strange twinge in my eyes. I kept seeing something. Every time I looked at it, it would vanish. A new report came in. Daedalus Legion was found dead. All of them. 6,000 men. I looked at some of the pictures and I nearly began vomiting. Missing heads, arms, legs, hearts torn out of their chests. Tentacles burnt to a crisp, while others were little more than piles of bones or hollowed-out armor sets. Some men had their faces turn a literal ghostly white, permanently contorted into an expression of absolute terror. Then the cascade began. More reports coming in, scout teams going missing. Slaver units finding locals to enslave only to vanish moments later. Some units engaged in pursuit of the local sapients, only to have arms and legs suddenly rent from their bodies. Others appear to have been mauled to death by some strange creature. Armored columns had broken down, in some cases literally falling apart while in motion. I began to panic as I noticed more and more engines were flaming out. I noticed more communication channels disappearing from my console. I looked behind me as the lights flickered, only to notice a streak of purple blood now leading towards a shadow in the hallway. I stood up. grabbing my trusty sword from its resting place nearby, and looked around. I walked forward with extreme caution. I could feel it. I could feel someone, something, watching me, somewhere. I stood by the light fixture at the end of the corridor and stopped dead in my tracks as I smelled the stench of blood. All kinds of blood. I focused my warrior's eye and quickly flicked the switch on and off again. The light went on, casting a short but telling glow on the massacred, mauled, and half-eaten corpses of my underlings. A Serani with his face eaten clean off, revealing only his skull. A Daragantis with all of his 6 arms missing, what was left of his body pinned up into the wall with someone else's spine. Several of the insectoid species serving the Empire lying on the ground on their backs with their bellies sliced open. Blood saturated the room. Red, blue, gold, purple, violet, and pink, all the colors of the Emperor's servants used to paint a macabre work of horrifying art. I noticed a shadow and swung my blade. It cut only through the blood-stained air behind me and embedded itself into the doorframe. It dug so deep I could not dislodge it and picked up a crewman's rifle instead. The lights flickered more and finally went out. I had to use the flashlight on the gun in my hands to see. I headed back to my console and checked, the soft blue glow from the readouts helping calm me down. No comms channels were open. The entire fleet had gone dark. Having come to the conclusion that something was very wrong, I prepared an escape pod. On the way, I would hit the ship's data core and wipe it clean so the locals could never find anything out about us. I headed back down the corridor. The bodies that greeted me previously were now gone. The blood, the death, the decay, gone. The walls and floor are pristine and clean. Suddenly, inexplicably, I heard nothing. I saw nothing. There were just bodies. How could something vanish so fast? I shook my head and held the rifle up. I sank into a defensive posture as the noise around me suddenly died. The lights flickered for the last time as the ship's reactor shut down. Nothing but deathly, empty silence. I wasted no time and kept crouched down and quiet, doing my level best to stop my footsteps from echoing in the empty halls. I spotted something out of the corner of my eye. A shadow. A set of shoulders. "Who is there?" I yelled out, aiming my rifle at the noise. I moved the flashlight towards the sound, and it illuminated the smiling remains of a crew member, 2 of his 4 arms missing, his leg partially chewed through, and his chest open such that I could see his unbeating heart. I let out a shriek of terror and recoiled as I made eye contact with him, his face contorted in a twisted smile. When I brought the light back to face him after regaining my composure, he was gone. I looked left. I looked right. I looked behind me. I looked out the window. Nothing. I sprinted towards the data core room and get the hell out of this place. I opened the door, my eyes darting around to try locate the shadows in my peripheral vision, and gasped in shock as I saw what was in there. Skeletal remains of the entire computation crew. Stripped of flesh and hanging from the walls, symbols etched into the ground and ceiling with their blood, a cruel effigy of some strange idol made of bones and skull. I could not handle it at this point and began to violently vomit in the corridor. Once my stomach was empty, I moved in and tried to set the data core to purge itself and overload. I retched heavily as I had to move some skeletal remains out of my way. The terminal was unresponsive. Even emergency power and local batteries were drained. As I turned around to leave, a skeleton hanging from the wall dropped down and landed on me. I panicked and ran into the corridor and smashed it into the window, shattering it. I wasn't going to be here 1 second longer and made my way to the escape pods. I could hear strange noises the closer to the pods I got. The more I ran, the louder they got. Whispers, screams, growls, roars, all manner of horrific noises echoing in my dead ship. "Get away from me!" I screamed and began to fire wildly at anything I could see or think I saw. I finally got to the pod. Miraculously, it was still operational. I stuffed my rifle in it and activated the keypad. Something grabbed me. A thing wrapped around my foot and suddenly dragged me toward a wall, pinning me up against it. "Get off me!" I demanded, struggling. No matter how I moved, I was kept in place. The light from the star moved just so, illuminating my assailant. It was a crew member from my ship, a fellow Karasani. It was little more than faltering cartilage and a mishmash of flesh and bone, but its eyes, now a blinding, horrific bright red, stared straight into my soul. Hubris, arrogance, selfishness, hatred, greed. Oh, yes, you stink of it, it said to me. I couldn't hold much and began to dry heave as the sight of the bones and cartilage barely hanging onto the face moved as it spoke. Why? It tightened its grip on my throat. Once we hunted them, their souls so potent and flesh so sweet, barely a few hundred could sate us for a decade. Now there are so few, and we cannot hunt lest we risk their extinction. So now we will hunt you. What are you? I gasped out at it. We are shadows, nightmares, ghosts in the machine. We are them. We are they. We were once humanity's nightmares and ghouls. Their emotions were so potent we could feed off them just by being near them. We have not killed for millennia. Until you came along, it said, and threw me against the opposite wall, pinning me against it. Why did you do this? Do we not have the same enemy if you hunt humanity? I asked. It growled loudly, its horrifying animal roar echoing through the ship. You killed too many of them. Now there are too few. Now we must find new hunting grounds. Now we must kill new prey. Humanity is barely a fraction of what it once was. I think it is only fair the hunter becomes the hunted. Please stop! I nearly voided my bowels again, both at the horror I was witnessing and the fact I had become so cowardly as to beg for mercy. Evil always tastes better than good. There is nothing in this afterlife that sates our cravings more than the cowardly screaming of a cockroach who thinks he is a king. You will make for a fine hunt until mankind can spread its roots one more. It growled and slammed me against the pod's door. We are coming for you. We do not rest. We do not sleep. We are as patient as the universe itself. We can hide anywhere, and you will face vengeance for what you have done today. I was thrown into the escape pod. Your gods will not save you now, it said with a horrifying chuckle. It hit the button, and I was ejected into space, heading for home. Just as the stasis unit kicked in and I began to freeze for the long journey home, I got one last look at the ship. Every window had hundreds of eyes, glowing various colors, staring right at me with sadistic smiles and scarred or half-eaten faces. The faces of my countrymen, of slaves, of soldiers, of men I once knew partially eaten, faded or blasted away, now looking at me with a mixture of hatred and hunger. What have I done? What did I just unleash upon the universe? This was my fault. If I had just left the planet alone, now they hunt us. Now they feed on us. What have I done? Of all the sapient races who inhabit the galaxy, of all the monsters and fiends who prowl the darkness that lies between stars, none are more feared nor more reviled than the humans. There are many reasons for this, but the most obvious of them is their appearance. For you see, due to some twist of fate or cruel evolutionary joke, humanity's mere semblance inspires terror and disgust in all who look upon them. They're the universal image of death, and they have always been hated for it. To the warps, they look to be infested with parasitic horrors, reminiscent of a terrible pestilence that wiped out the first Warpian extraplanetary colony. To the Ool, they appear remarkably similar to mammoths, mythological creatures who bring plague and famine wherever they tread. To the Orlar, their shape dredges up ancestral memories of long-extinct predators. To the Heron, they resemble festering corpses. On and on it goes, a dozen other twisted coincidences. Every single species seems to have one reason or another to avoid mankind, one reason or another to feel repulsed and afraid at the mere sight of them. And that's even without their long and bloody history. The humans did not ascend to the stars naturally. In fact, they may never have been able to at all. They were discovered by the Thraxian Commonwealth during the height of the Thraxian-My-Lai War, though it is believed that the Commonwealth higher-ups had been aware of them for some time prior to first contact. By that time, humanity had already pushed themselves and their planet to the brink. Years of consumption, pollution, and war on a global scale lead to economic and ecological collapse. The oceans turned lifeless, formerly fertile soil became eroded, and the climate system was thrown into chaos. Through the mass extinction event, their civilization clung on to life by a corporate thread. the impoverished ruins of society only surviving through indoor agriculture, water desalination, controlled environments, geoengineering, and sustainable energy. The Thrax were horrified, both by the appearance of the humans and by what they'd done to their own world. But they also saw an opportunity. The Thrax themselves were never a strong race, spindly quadrupeds with no natural weapons. They relied almost entirely on their prehensile tails and high intelligence to get by. During times of conflict, such as their war against the My Lai republics, they were heavily dependent on drones and subjugated primitives to fight their battles for them. Mankind was the single most destructive and depraved sapient species that had ever been discovered, with their mere appearance serving as a potent psychological weapon. The Commonwealth wanted them, and as the central economic powers of the Milky Way, they tended to get what they wanted. They offered the humans primitive FTL technology and welfare aid in exchange for their service. Humanity would be propelled into the space age and would be given the tools necessary for restoring their withered home. But in return, they would serve as the Thrax's mercenaries. The Commonwealth merely wanted to use their new allies as shock troops against the republics, but the humans would go far further than that. The chaotic governments of Earth not only supplied a steady stream of disposable cannon fodder from their overpopulated slums, but they also utilized some of the most horrifying weapons imaginable against their enemies. After the My Lai blew up an unarmed medical vessel that may or may not have been deliberately led into danger by the human military, it was code black for them. The humans unleashed a string of horrific pathogens upon the United Republic forces, terrible plagues they snatched from the festering pits of their homeworld and enhanced through genetic engineering. One by one, the My Lai colonies fell silent as the cold touch of the human pestilence descended upon them, leaving mountains of the dead and dying to rot in the dark. It was a disgusting atrocity, an abominable waste of intelligent life, one for which even the human governments have little true excuse. In just 2 months, mankind had taken more lives through their atrocities than all the other factions had managed over the last 7 years of war combined. 3 of the 4 republics surrendered to the Commonwealth in face of such horror, but the 4th fought on, utilizing devastating biological and chemical weapons of their own. Ultimately, however, it was too little too late, as they would learn when a joint human-Thraxian fleet glassed their largest colony. The 4th My Lai Republic surrendered, and the Thraxian Commonwealth claimed their victory, though their joy was far drowned out by the horror of what they'd unleashed onto the galaxy at large. The My Lai would never recover from the absolute decimation they suffered during the conflict, an entirely pointless conflict that began as nothing more than a petty squabble over a resource-rich asteroid belt. Having lost most of their former territory, along with over half their population, what remained of the once proud republics would ultimately choose to join the Interstellar Federation for the protection it offered. The humans continued to act as the Thrax's military, though as they expanded and advanced at an exponential pace, the Thrax would gradually come to treat them more as dangerous allies, rather than just disposable weapons. As long as they never acted out against the Commonwealth's interests, they didn't much care what the humans got up to on the miserable little planets they ruled. Other races refused to have any contact with humanity whatsoever, going to great lengths to avoid the monsters that even the Thrax didn't seem to want to deal with. Generations passed and tensions simmered, and still the humans remained isolated from their galactic neighbors, only emerging from their mysterious territories when the Thrax called upon them, the tales about their kind growing ever more exaggerated over time. More than a century after the Thraxian My Lai War, the Academy Arcadia would open its doors as the first interspecies school. At first, it only admitted races aligned with the Interstellar Federation, but in celebration of the long peace that the major galactic superpowers had enjoyed for so long, the sapients associated with the Thraxian Commonwealth would also eventually be accepted. People began to have second thoughts about that decision when they realized that humans were included amongst those species. I write to the Galactic Council of the Grand Federation. This is not a greeting, it is a dire and serious warning. It pertains to humans. Humans are, well, very average. In terms of intelligence, they rank dead center of smart and stupid. I know men who can direct an entire asteroid field out of a star system, mine it clean of any resources, and do it all with no help from AI or targeting systems. Those same men can't tell me how to restock a vending machine. I know a human who can't answer simple math questions like 5 plus 5, but this same man knows how to fix a fusion reactor with nothing more than a pipe wrench. In terms of combat ability, we will not use humanity's super soldiers, the legionnaires as the example here, just the average human grunt. I know riflemen that can't hit the broadside of a barn with a Gatling gun, but place a knife in their hands, and not even a Mantidean eviscerator drone can stand up to them. Conversely, find a human with a long-range weapon like the human sniper. These guys can hit a target the size of a coin 2 miles away in a hurricane. These same men will never hold any chance in a boxing ring. Humanity is dead in the center of the sapient average, remarkable for any species. They represent the fastest and slowest members of any race, the smartest and the dumbest of any race, the hardest fighters and the weakest pacifists of any race. This is why humanity as a whole has found such a unique niche within galactic society, and why everyone seems to both love them and hate them all at the same time. This is why you can find a human in almost any position, anywhere it is easy for them to live there, or any place that agrees with their biology. They adapt to almost any situation they find themselves in. Given enough time, funding, or reason to stick around, they become indistinguishable from one's own kin by the sheer tenacity with which they engage their duties. But this is not why I am writing. I wish not to sing their praises. I come with a dire and sincere warning. Humans are far, far, far more dangerous than even they give themselves credit for. The average is human. This much is certain, except in one single respect: children. Specifically juveniles or younglings, as the rest of us call them. We are all protective to one degree or another with our broods, this much is certain, but humans take it to a whole different level. I speak specifically of one particular human. A shipmate of mine, Carrie, a human crew member I hired on the recommendation of my harbor master, an average human by all accounts. She came on board as a ship's janitor, but quickly became enamored with the crew kids. Several juvenile Raxus, Oksani, and a few others, and within a few weeks, she had become their de facto babysitter, as she called it. Aside from her duties of stocking vending machines and cleaning the ship, she spent her free time playing with the younglings aboard the ship. Knowing humans, we never questioned this. They were always friendly and could be trusted beyond the norm, just like any other race. I thought humans were just abnormally normal, until I encountered the one single aspect of humanity that puts them far above the rest of us. All of us are inferior to this one aspect by any measure possible. If Carrie's words are anything to go by in this respect, then this is something that extends to the entire species as opposed to just a few members. If what Carrie tells me is true, then it means one of two things. We have an incredibly powerful ally, or an extremely dangerous and nigh unstoppable enemy. I prefer to think of the former, to be honest. In order to understand what is going on, I shall explain. During a routine cargo trip, my ship and its crew were hauling cargo to a human Outer Worlds colony to trade in red spice and medical equipment. Simple stuff. We were attacked by a gang of Rathani pirates, specifically the King's Masons. Yes, those King's Masons. The kind of gang that single-handedly wiped out a Federation escort fleet and held the Rathani Queen hostage for 2 months. It started with a comms hail. "Stand and deliver!" they said as their ion cannons shut our ship down and they readied to board us. Within the space of a few minutes, the entire crew was on station, ready to fight them off. Unfortunately for, well, as it turned out, they skipped the main boarding ramp and decided instead to cut a hole through the cargo bay to work their way up in the ship. This put them in direct contact with her. A group of them blasted through the area, looting whatever cargo they could carry, and began to cut their way into the ship. All was going well for them as they looted the ship and broke doors open to get into personal quarters to steal any valuables. Then, one poor bastard stumbled across Carrie and the kids under her care. She stood her ground, refusing to surrender. He beat her hard, and she refused to surrender. She told the kids to go hide in their game of hide and seek. He tried to grab one of the kids as it vanished into the maintenance hatches. She stopped him just in time, allowing the child to escape. He said an offhand comment about how he would like to make juvenile-flavored soup. Carrie, with a wild banshee-like scream of hatred, rage, and anger, jumped on him. Caught off guard by the sudden attack, he was unable to do anything about it as with lightning speed, she pinned him to the ground, and then, with naught but her bare hands, began ripping his teeth out. I will repeat this so there is no room for ambiguity. With her bare hands, she started ripping his teeth out. Following her enraged banshee wailing and the Rathani warrior blood-curdling screams of agony, the other warriors soon followed, only to meet similar fates. Carrie began to cut a merciless swath of death and sadistic insanity as she severed legs, cut off heads, and beat soldiers to death with their own severed limbs. It was during this massacre that I, and many crew members, saw for the first time the sight of a Rathani warrior experiencing the emotion of fear. Carrie found one Rathani warrior and stole one of his grenades during her rampage. She shattered this poor bastard's jaw, jamming it open. She pulled the pin on the grenade and shoved it down his gob. The look on that poor bastard's face will haunt me till the day I die, as he helplessly claws at his own belly trying to get the grenade out. I will never forget the sheer terror in his eyes as the grenade exploded. Being showered in the guts and bone shrapnel from one of their own kin caused the rest of the pirates to flee the scene. The ship managed to dislodge itself before escaping, narrowly avoiding Carrie's hurling of expletives and curses at them as they ran back to the void with their tails between their legs. Carrie returned to a modicum of normal as the ship was restored to basic functionality. We made an emergency jump to the human colony world and broadcasted an emergency. Human fleets were on us within minutes. Carrie, however, suddenly seemed normal. The look in her eyes faded, her breathing slowed, and her expression calmed. She cried out, "Ollie, Ollie, oxen free! I give up! The pizza's on me!" Within moments of this exclamation, the younglings, all unharmed and untouched, suddenly appeared and tackled her to the ground as if she were a dainty feather. She wrestled with them before they all claimed victory, and with concerted effort carried her to the mess hall. We told the humans that helped us everything Carrie did, questioning if she was okay. They simply shrugged and explained that what Carrie did was, quote, too lenient. I have spent the better part of the last 200 hours engaging in researching this topic, and all results are the same. Humans, regardless of the species in their care or even vicinity, are psychotically protective of any juvenile under their care or even in their vicinity. Humans with no connections to any people involved will, without hesitation, on sensing a juvenile of any species in danger, will rush headfirst into that danger with no regards for their own safety. It has occurred too many times, on and off record, to be any kind of coincidence. This effect seems to be dramatically more pronounced with their own children or even family and friends. You, my counsel, may use this information however you please. I, however, must warn you to the absolute degree. Do not, under any circumstances, harm a child of any kind in the presence of a human. Period. You risk a horrible, merciless death at the hands of a creature whose parental instincts are so mind-numbingly strong they defy all logic, reason, and even biology. Under those average bodies and within those average minds lies the unstoppable beating heart of the single most dangerous force in the universe, parenthood. You have been warned. Sincerely, Praxis Thran, Captain of the Lightbringer cargo ship, Human Space, Epsilon Station.